In the hills of Palestine, 2,000 years ago, a collision was inevitable. On one side stood the might of Rome, the greatest empire in human history, with its legions, its absolute authority, and its divine emperor. On the other stood a carpenter from Nazareth who spoke of a different kind of kingdom. This is the story of that collision, and why it led to the most famous execution in history. To understand the conflict between Jesus and Rome, we must first understand what Palestine looked like under Roman occupation. This wasn't a peaceful coexistence. It was a military occupation enforced by brutal violence and psychological terror. Roman legions had conquered Palestine in 63 BC under Pompey the Great. By Jesus' time, the occupation was in its third generation, but resistance never died. The countryside was dotted with crosses bearing the crucified bodies of rebels, bandits, and anyone who dared challenge Roman authority. Josephus, the Jewish historian, records that after one revolt, the Roman general Varus crucified 2,000 Jews along the roads leading to Jerusalem as a warning to others. This was the world Jesus grew up in, a world where Roman soldiers could conscript any Jewish man to carry their equipment for a mile, where taxation was crushing and arbitrary, where the wrong word could lead to crucifixion. The psychological impact of living under such conditions cannot be overstated. Every Palestinian Jew understood that Rome ruled through fear, and that fear was carefully cultivated and maintained. The religious dimension of Roman occupation was equally oppressive. Rome didn't just demand political submission, it demanded religious submission to the imperial cult. Citizens throughout the empire were required to offer sacrifices to the emperor as a god. For Jews, whose first commandment forbade worshiping anyone but Yahweh, this created an impossible situation. Rome grudgingly allowed some exceptions for Jewish religious practices, but the underlying tension never disappeared. Into this powder keg stepped Jesus of Nazareth, and from his very first public words, he challenged the foundations of Roman power. When Jesus announced that the kingdom of heaven is at hand, he wasn't just making a spiritual statement. He was making a political one that Rome couldn't ignore. The word kingdom in the first century had only one meaning: a political realm with a king who exercised absolute authority. When Jesus spoke of God's kingdom, he was implicitly declaring that Caesar's kingdom was temporary, illegitimate, and doomed. This wasn't subtle theological language. This was revolutionary rhetoric that directly challenged Roman imperial ideology. Rome's power rested on the claim that Caesar was Lord of the world, appointed by the gods to rule all peoples. The imperial cult reinforced this message throughout the empire with temples, statues, coins, and ceremonies declaring Caesar is Lord. When Jesus and his followers proclaimed Jesus is Lord, they weren't just making a religious confession, they were committing treason against the Roman state. The political implications of Jesus' teaching went far beyond slogans. His Sermon on the Mount reads like a point-by-point rejection of Roman values. Where Rome celebrated military conquest, Jesus blessed peacemakers. Where Rome demanded vengeance against enemies, Jesus commanded love for them. Where Rome built its economy on slavery and exploitation, Jesus taught that the last shall be first and the first shall be last. Most dangerously, Jesus' kingdom teaching contained explicit economic challenges to Roman power. When he told his followers to render unto Caesar what is Caesar's and to God what is God's, he wasn't advocating cooperation with Rome. He was undermining the entire basis of Roman taxation and authority. In Roman imperial theology, everything belonged to Caesar. Land, crops, animals, and people were all possessions of the emperor, graciously allowed to remain with their current users in exchange for taxes, loyalty, and worship. When Jesus suggested that some things belonged to God rather than Caesar, he was denying Rome's foundational claim to total ownership of the world. The coin trick that prompted this famous saying makes the subversive nature of Jesus' response even clearer. When asked whether Jews should pay taxes to Caesar, Jesus asked whose image was on the Roman denarius. "Caesar's," came the reply. "Then give to Caesar what belongs to Caesar," Jesus said. But every Jew listening knew the implications. Humans are made in God's image, so give yourself to God, not Caesar. This wasn't clever diplomacy. It was revolutionary theology that undermined the entire system of Roman domination. Rome claimed ownership of human beings through slavery, taxation, and forced labor. Jesus was declaring that human beings belong to God alone and cannot legitimately be owned by any earthly power. The economic implications of Jesus' teaching created direct conflicts with Roman interests. Palestine was a crucial source of grain, olive oil, and other agricultural products for the empire. Roman taxation, often collected by local collaborators like the hated tax collectors, extracted enormous wealth from the province to fund imperial expansion and the luxurious lifestyle of Roman elites. Jesus' association with tax collectors like Matthew and Zacchaeus wasn't just about personal redemption. It was about transforming the economic relationships that kept Rome's exploitative system functioning. When Zacchaeus promised to give half his wealth to the poor and repay those he had cheated 4 times over, he was essentially dismantling the tax collection system that Rome depended on. Similarly, Jesus' feeding of the 5,000 carried profound political implications. In a world where hunger was a tool of social control, where Rome used food distribution to maintain loyalty and punish rebellion, the image of a Jewish teacher independently providing for thousands of people was deeply threatening to imperial authority. The religious establishment in Palestine found itself caught between these competing claims to ultimate authority. The temple priests, Sadducees, and other religious leaders had carved out positions of privilege within the Roman system. They collected taxes for Rome, maintained order among the Jewish population, and carefully avoided any actions that might provoke Roman retaliation. Jesus' temple cleansing represented a direct challenge to this accommodation with Roman power. When he overturned the money changers' tables and drove out those buying and selling, he wasn't just protesting religious corruption. He was attacking an economic system that benefited both the religious establishment and their Roman overlords. The temple operated as the central bank of Palestine, changing foreign currency, collecting taxes, and managing the enormous wealth that flowed through the sacrificial system. Much of this wealth ultimately ended up in Roman hands through various taxation schemes. By disrupting temple commerce, Jesus was striking at both religious corruption and economic collaboration with the occupying power. The political nature of Jesus' threat becomes crystal clear in the events leading to his arrest and execution. The religious authorities didn't charge him with heresy or blasphemy when they brought him to Pilate. They charged him with sedition, claiming he was forbidding people to pay taxes to Caesar and saying that he himself is Christ, a king. These weren't religious charges that a Roman governor would care about. They were political accusations that Rome took very seriously. The religious leaders understood that to get Roman cooperation in executing Jesus, they had to frame him as a political threat to imperial authority. Pontius Pilate's initial reluctance to execute Jesus had nothing to do with sympathy for his religious teaching. As a Roman governor, Pilate was trained to identify and eliminate genuine threats to Roman power while avoiding unnecessary conflicts that might destabilize his province. His investigation of Jesus was a political assessment. Did this man actually threaten Roman interests enough to warrant execution? The crowd's final argument that swayed Pilate reveals the political calculation involved. If you release this man, you are not Caesar's friend. Anyone who makes himself a king opposes Caesar. This wasn't theological reasoning. It was political blackmail. The crowd was threatening to report Pilate to Rome as someone who protected enemies of the emperor. The inscription placed above Jesus' cross, King of the Jews, wasn't chosen randomly. This was the official Roman charge against him, claiming royal authority in defiance of Caesar's rule. Crucifixion itself was a specifically political punishment, reserved for slaves, rebels, and enemies of the state. Rome didn't crucify people for religious disagreements. They crucified them for challenging imperial authority. The location of Jesus' execution, outside Jerusalem's walls along a major road, served Rome's purposes perfectly. Crucifixion was designed to be a public spectacle, a visual reminder of what happened to those who defied Roman power. Every traveler entering or leaving Jerusalem would see the crucified bodies and understand the message. This is what happens to enemies of Rome. But Rome's calculated use of crucifixion to deter rebellion backfired spectacularly in Jesus' case. Instead of ending his movement, his execution became the foundation for a new kind of resistance that would ultimately prove more threatening to Roman power than any military revolt. The early Christian proclamation that Jesus had risen from the dead wasn't just a religious claim. It was a political statement that Rome's ultimate weapon, death itself, had failed to defeat God's kingdom. When Christians declared that the crucified Jesus was now Lord of Lords and King of Kings, they were announcing that Caesar's power was temporary and illusory. This explains why Roman authorities continued to persecute Christians long after Jesus' death. The problem wasn't just that Christians worshipped a different god. Many religions existed within the Roman Empire. The problem was that Christianity represented a fundamental challenge to the ideological foundations of Roman power. Christian communities practiced economic sharing that demonstrated alternative ways of organizing society. They refused to participate in emperor worship, rejecting the religious foundations of imperial authority. They proclaimed loyalty to a different king and a different kingdom, undermining the absolute allegiance that Rome demanded from all subjects. The political implications of Christian teaching became even more evident as the movement spread throughout the empire. Christian communities refused to participate in many aspects of Roman civic life: gladiatorial games, military service, trade guilds that required pagan oaths, and social events that included emperor worship. This wasn't just personal piety. It was systematic non-cooperation with the institutions that maintained Roman power. When Christians proclaimed that Jesus, not Caesar, was Lord, they were advocating a form of resistance that was more threatening to imperial stability than armed rebellion. The Roman response reveals how seriously imperial authorities took this threat. Emperors from Nero to Diocletian launched systematic persecutions designed to force Christians to choose between their faith and their lives. The fact that many Christians chose death rather than offer incense to Caesar's statue demonstrates the inherently political nature of their religious commitment. These persecutions failed because they were based on a fundamental misunderstanding of the Christian movement. Rome thought they were dealing with a religious sect that could be controlled through traditional methods of repression. They failed to recognize that Christianity represented a complete alternative vision of human society and authority. The ultimate irony is that Rome's own attempts to destroy Christianity helped spread it throughout the empire. Every martyrdom demonstrated that there were people willing to die rather than acknowledge Caesar's ultimate authority. Every Christian community that survived persecution proved that Rome's power had limits. Within 3 centuries of Jesus' crucifixion, Christianity had become the official religion of the Roman Empire. The cross, Rome's symbol of ultimate defeat, had become the empire's official emblem. The carpenter from Nazareth, whom Pilate executed as a political rebel, had conquered the empire that killed him. This transformation wasn't just a religious conversion. It was a political revolution that fundamentally altered the nature of power in the Western world. The Christian Emperor Constantine didn't just legalize a new religion. He acknowledged that ultimate authority belonged to God, not Caesar. The conflict between Jesus and Rome ultimately reveals the limitations of imperial power based on violence and coercion. Rome could conquer territories, collect taxes, and crucify rebels, but it couldn't control the human heart or the power of ideas that offered hope for a different kind of world. Jesus' kingdom teaching proved more durable than Rome's legions because it addressed human longings that military force couldn't satisfy: the desire for justice, dignity, purpose, and transcendent meaning. When Rome fell, these ideas survived and continued to shape human civilization. The political dimension of Jesus' conflict with Rome reminds us that his message was never meant to be confined to private spiritual experience. From the beginning, following Jesus meant choosing loyalty to a different kind of kingdom with different values, different priorities, and different claims on human allegiance. The cross stands as history's greatest example of how apparent political defeat can become spiritual victory, how the empire's ultimate weapon can become the foundation for a movement that outlasts the empire itself. In executing Jesus as a political rebel, Rome thought it was eliminating a threat to its power. Instead, it created the symbol that would eventually replace Caesar's eagle as the defining emblem of Western civilization. The kingdom that Jesus proclaimed proved to be more real and more lasting than the empire that tried to destroy it. This is perhaps the most remarkable aspect of the entire conflict, that a movement based on love, forgiveness, and service to others could overcome an empire built on military might, political domination, and economic exploitation. Today, when we see the cross, we're looking at the ultimate victory of powerless love over loveless power, of a kingdom built on sacrifice over an empire built on violence. The conflict between Jesus and Rome ended not with Rome's triumph, but with the transformation of the cross from an instrument of execution into a symbol of hope that continues to inspire resistance to injustice and oppression around the world.